The sky above the planet Velcorin was on fire with light. Not the fire of war, not the fire of destruction. This was the fire of celebration, millions of fireworks bursting over 1,000 cities at once, painting every cloud in gold, purple, and green. Music poured out from every street. Aliens of 100 different species danced together in the open squares, drinking, laughing, hugging strangers like old friends. It was the biggest party the galaxy had ever seen, and it was a party to celebrate the death of an entire species. They were celebrating the day humanity died. 50 years ago, Earth had gone silent forever. The strongest alliance in the galaxy, the Grand Concord, had crushed humanity in a war that lasted only 3 brutal years. Human ships were destroyed, human cities burned, human colonies, scattered across nearby star systems, were wiped from every star map. The Grand Concord called it the Great Correction. Humanity, they said, had been too dangerous, too unpredictable, too violent to be allowed to grow. So they were stopped, erased, made an example for every other species watching from the shadows. This is what happens if you rise too fast, too strong, too proud. Today was the 50th anniversary of Earth's fall, and across 1,000 worlds, the galaxy celebrated. On Velcorin, the capital of the Grand Concord, the celebration was the grandest of all. A massive statue stood in the center of the main square. A broken human ship, carved from black stone, crushed under the boot of a conquered warrior. Children climbed on it and took pictures. Vendors sold sweet drinks shaped like tiny earth globes, cracked in half. Among the crowd stood a young officer named Threll. Threll was not human. He belonged to the Ashari, a tall, blue-skinned species known for their sharp minds and calm nature. He wore the uniform of the Concord fleet, silver and black, with 3 small medals on his chest. He was 26 years old, young for an officer, but he had earned his rank the hard way. He had been there, at the end, at the final battle above Earth. He remembered it more than he wanted to. Threll stood near the edge of the square, a drink in his hand that he hadn't touched. Around him, his fellow soldiers laughed and sang old victory songs. A large screen above the square replayed footage from 50 years ago. Human ships exploding in the dark, one after another like fireworks of their own. The crowd cheered every time a ship broke apart. Threll did not cheer. He watched the footage with a strange, tight feeling in his chest. It wasn't guilt exactly. It wasn't sadness either. It was something colder, something like a warning bell ringing far away, one that only he could hear. "You look like someone who lost a bet," said a voice beside him. Threll turned. It was Commander Yasa, his old squad leader from the war. She was older now, her once black scales turning silver with age, but her eyes were still sharp as blades. She had fought beside him at Earth. She had seen what he had seen. "Just thinking," Threll said. Yasa followed his gaze to the screen. Another human ship exploded. The crowd roared with joy. 50 years, she said quietly, and they still celebrate like it happened yesterday. "Should we not?" Threll asked. Yasa didn't answer right away. She took a slow breath, watching the fireworks reflect in Threll's eyes. "We should remember," she said finally. "But there's a difference between remembering and this." She waved a hand at the drunken crowd, the dancing, the mock statues of dead humans being kicked and laughed at by children. "This isn't remembering. This is forgetting the wrong way." Threll frowned. "What do you mean?" Yasa was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that Threll would remember for the rest of his life. "We never found their bodies, Threll. Not most of them. We found broken ships, burned cities, but the humans, so many of them just vanished. No bodies, no wreckage. Just gone." She shook her head. "A species that fights until the last soldier does not vanish quietly. They fight until the fire goes out. Humanity's fire never went out. It just stopped burning where we could see it." Threll felt a cold shiver crawl up his spine. "You think some of them survived?" he asked. Yasa gave a small, humorless smile. "I think we should ask ourselves why a species smart enough to build weapons that scared the entire galaxy would let itself die so easily." Before Threll could respond, a loud cheer rose from the crowd. The big screen switched to a new image, a live shot of Earth itself silent and gray, a dead planet floating in the dark. No lights, no signals, no life. "To 50 years of peace," someone shouted through a loudspeaker. "To 50 years of peace," the crowd roared back. Threll raised his glass out of habit, but he did not drink. His eyes stayed on the image of Earth. Something about it felt wrong. Not sad, not victorious, waiting. Far away from the noisy celebration, deep in the emptiness of space, near the edge of what used to be human territory, something old was floating silently in the dark. It was a small satellite, barely bigger than a car, tumbling slowly through the black. It had been floating there for exactly 50 years, one of thousands of pieces of space junk left behind after the war. To any scanner, it looked dead, broken, harmless. The Grand Concorde had scanned this area 100 times over the decades. Every time their sensors reported the same thing. No power, no signal, no threat. They were wrong. Deep inside the satellite, buried under layers of fake wreckage and cold metal, a tiny light blinked once. Then again. Then it stayed on. A soft hum began, so quiet that no ship passing nearby would ever notice it. Old circuits, untouched for half a century, slowly came back to life, one by one, like a heart starting to beat again after a long, long sleep. On the side of the satellite, hidden under a layer of black paint, a symbol became faintly visible. A symbol the Grand Concorde hadn't seen in 50 years and hoped they would never see again. A small blue circle, a single star inside it. The mark of Earth. The satellite's ancient computer, older than most of the soldiers celebrating on Velcorin, began sending a single signal outward into the void. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just 3 simple words, repeated over and over in a code that hadn't been used in 50 years. "We are ready. We are ready. We are ready." The signal shot out into space, invisible to Concord scanners, moving from one silent relay to another, hopping across the stars like a whisper passed from friend to friend. It traveled to places the Grand Concorde had long forgotten: dead moons, empty asteroids, abandoned mining stations that no one had bothered to check in decades because there was nothing there. They were wrong about that too. Back on Velcorin, the party continued long into the night. Threll eventually left the noise of the square and walked alone toward the officers' quarters. The fireworks still lit up the sky behind him, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He couldn't stop thinking about what Yasa had said. A species that fights until the last soldier does not vanish quietly. He remembered the final battle above Earth more clearly than he wanted to. He remembered the human commander's last transmission before the final assault. Not a message of surrender, not a message of fear, but something strange. Something that had confused every officer in the fleet at the time. "This is not the end," the human voice had said, calm and steady, right before communications went dark. "This is only the part where you stop watching." At the time, everyone had laughed it off as the desperate words of a dying enemy. Now walking alone under the fading fireworks, Threll wasn't laughing anymore. He reached his quarters and sat down at his desk, opening an old file on his personal tablet. Footage from the final battle. Footage he had watched 100 times over the years but never really understood. He watched the human ships retreat in the final hours, not toward Earth, but scattering outward in every direction, disappearing into deep space in small groups. At the time, Concord Command had assumed those ships were destroyed shortly after, hunted down one by one in the months that followed. But had anyone actually confirmed that? Had anyone actually found the wreckage? Threll opened a search on the Concorde military database, typing in a simple question. How many human ships were confirmed destroyed after the retreat at Earth? The answer that came back made his blood run cold. Confirmed destroyed, 12 estimated ships in the retreat, over 412, out of 400. Where had the other 388 ships gone? Threll didn't sleep that night. He sat at his desk long after the fireworks stopped, staring at old maps, old reports, old records that no one had bothered to look at closely in 50 years. Because the war was over, humanity was gone, and nobody wanted to look too hard at a victory they were so eager to celebrate. Somewhere outside his window, the city of Velcorin was finally quiet, the celebration dying down as the night grew late. Drunken cheers faded into soft snoring. The statue of the crushed human ship stood alone in the empty square, lit only by the last dying embers of fireworks smoke drifting through the air. And far above, unseen and unheard, more old machines across the galaxy were waking up. On a frozen moon 3 systems away, a hidden bunker buried deep under the ice cracked open its outer door for the first time in 50 years. Dust and frost fell away from old metal walls as lights flickered on one by one down a long, dark corridor. On an abandoned mining station near a dead star, machinery long thought to be scrap metal began to hum with quiet, patient power. And deep beneath the ruins of Earth itself, the planet everyone believed was a lifeless gray rock, a massive door hidden under 50 years of dust and rubble, groaned as it slowly began to open. Inside, in the dark, a single light turned on. Then another. Then hundreds more spreading through tunnels that stretched for miles beneath the surface. Tunnels the Grand Concord never knew existed. Tunnels dug in secret over 5 decades by people the galaxy had already buried and forgotten. A voice echoed through the tunnels, calm, steady, and human. "The signal has been sent," the voice said. "Wake everyone. It's time." Somewhere in that vast underground city, thousands of eyes opened. Thousands of feet touched cold metal floors. Thousands of voices, quiet at first, began to move with purpose after 50 long years of waiting in the dark. Humanity had not died on that day 50 years ago. They had simply gone quiet. And now, the silence was over. Back on Velcorin, morning came. Threll hadn't slept, but he had made a decision. He needed to speak to Commander Yasa immediately. He needed to show her what he had found. The missing ships, the strange gaps in the old reports, the questions nobody had thought to ask because victory had made everyone comfortable, and comfortable people stopped looking for danger. He grabbed his tablet and rushed out the door, still in his uniform from the night before, his mind racing. He didn't get far. Sirens began blaring across the entire city. Not celebration sirens, not fireworks, alarm sirens. Threll froze in the hallway as red emergency lights began flashing down every corridor. Over the building's speaker system, a shaking voice made an announcement that stopped his heart cold. "All fleet personnel report to command immediately. We are detecting unknown signals from deep space. Repeat, unknown signals detected across multiple star systems. Origin, unknown." Threll's hands went cold around his tablet. He didn't need to guess where the signals were coming from. He already knew. Somewhere out in the dark, quiet corners of the galaxy, dead things were waking up. And whatever had been sleeping for 50 years was not sleeping anymore. The party was over. The command center of Velcorin was full of noise and panic. Officers ran from station to station. Screens flashed red all across the room. Alarms rang through every hallway of the massive Concord military building, echoing louder than the fireworks had just hours before. Threll pushed through the crowded hallway, his uniform still wrinkled from the night before, his tablet clutched tightly in his hand. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. But none of that mattered now. He had been right. Something was happening. He reached the main command room just as Commander Yasa was walking in from the opposite side. Her eyes were sharp, focused, all traces of the previous night's tiredness gone. She looked like a soldier again, not a retired officer at a party. "Yasa!" Threll called out, rushing toward her. She turned, and for a moment their eyes met. She didn't look surprised to see him. She looked like she had been expecting this conversation. "You found something too, didn't you?" she said quietly. Threll held up his tablet. "Missing ships, 388 of them. Nobody ever confirmed." "I know," Yasa cut him off. "I've been digging through old files all night as well. Come on, we need to see what command has found." They pushed through the crowd together and reached the center of the room, where a large holographic map of the galaxy floated above a round table. Dozens of small red dots blinked across the map, some near old human colonies, some in empty systems, some disturbingly close to major conquered worlds. At the head of the table stood General Draxus, the highest-ranking officer on Velcorin. He was an older Ashari, tall and broad, with deep scars across one side of his face from wars fought long before humanity even had spaceships. His expression was grim as he studied the map. "Report," he said sharply without looking up. A young technician stepped forward nervously. "Sir, we're picking up signals from at least 40 different locations. All of them were previously marked as dead zones. Abandoned stations, destroyed colonies, empty asteroid fields. As of 6 hours ago, they all became active at the exact same time." "Exact same time?" Draxus asked, his voice tightening. "Yes, sir. Down to the second." The room went quiet for a moment. Everyone understood what that meant. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't random space debris waking up on its own. This was planned, coordinated. Someone, or something, had triggered all of it at once, on purpose. "What kind of signals?" Yasa asked, stepping forward. The technician looked uneasy. "That's the strange part, Commander. It's not a distress call. It's not a weapon signature. It's a command signal. Like something is calling machines to wake up and follow orders." "Whose orders?" Threll asked. The technician hesitated, glancing at General Draxus before answering. "We traced the origin point of the very first signal, sir. It came from a small satellite near the old human home system." The room fell completely silent. Every officer in the command center turned to look at the holographic map, where a single blinking red dot pulsed quietly near a small blue marker labeled with one word: Earth. General Draxus stared at the map for a long moment, his jaw tight, his scarred face unreadable. He had fought in the war against humanity 50 years ago. He had been young then, barely older than Threll was now. He remembered what humans were capable of: their stubbornness, their creativity, their refusal to ever truly give up, even when logic said they should. "Send a scout ship," Draxus finally ordered. "Small, fast, quiet. I want eyes on Earth within 12 hours. "Sir," an officer said carefully, "our last full scan of Earth was 3 years ago. Nothing but ruins. No power. No life signs." "Then a new scan will confirm that," Draxus said sharply. "But I want to see it with my own eyes before I believe old reports written by people too eager to declare victory and go home." His gaze shifted toward Threll and Yasa. "You two. You were both there at the final battle. You'll join the scout team." Threll felt his stomach tighten. Going back to Earth, the place where the war had ended, the place burned into his nightmares for 50 years, was the last thing he wanted to do. But he also knew Draxus was right. If anyone could recognize what was wrong, it would be someone who remembered what Earth used to look like before it fell silent. "Understood, sir," Threll said. Yasa nodded beside him, her expression calm, but her eyes sharp with old memories rising back to the surface. While the scout ship was being prepared, more reports began flooding into command from across the galaxy. Threll sat in a side room, going through the growing list with Yasa, trying to make sense of the pattern. "Look at this," Yasa said, pointing to a report from a conquered outpost near the edge of old human territory. A mining station that's been listed as abandoned for 40 years just powered up its full defense grid. No ships came, no visible crew. It just turned itself on. "And this one," Threll added, scrolling to another report. "A frozen moon in the Kessa system. Sensors detected a massive door opening in the ice, big enough to fit a warship through. There was nothing supposed to be there. No buildings, no structures, just rock and ice. Which means whatever built that door built it in secret," Yasa said slowly, "before the war even ended." Threll leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning. This isn't new construction, this is old. Really old, like this was built during the war, maybe even before it, and then hidden, waiting. "Waiting for what?" Yasa asked. Threll didn't answer right away. He was thinking about the human commander's last words before Earth went dark. "This is not the end. This is only the part where you stop watching." "Waiting for us to stop watching," he said quietly. Yasa's eyes widened slightly as the pieces clicked together in her mind. They knew we'd get comfortable. They knew that after enough years passed, we'd stop checking the old places. We'd assume it was over. And it worked, Threll said. For 50 years it worked perfectly. 3 hours later, the scout ship launched from Velcorin, a sleek, fast vessel called the Windrunner, built for speed and stealth rather than combat. Threll and Yasa sat in the small crew cabin alongside a pilot and 2 other officers, watching the stars streak past the front window as the ship jumped from system to system, heading toward what used to be humanity's home. The journey would take almost 10 hours. Nobody talked much during the trip. The mood in the cabin was heavy, tense, like everyone on board could feel that something important, something dangerous, was waiting for them at the end of the journey. Threll spent most of the trip reviewing old battle footage again, searching for anything he might have missed the first 100 times he watched it. Yasa sat across from him, quiet, her eyes closed, though Threll doubted she was actually sleeping. "Can I ask you something?" Threll said eventually, breaking the silence. Yasa opened one eye. "Go ahead. Do you regret it? The war? What we did to them?" Yasa was quiet for a long moment, considering the question carefully. "I regret that it happened at all," she said finally. "War is never something to celebrate no matter who wins. But do I regret defending my people? No. We believed humanity was a threat to the whole galaxy. Maybe we were wrong about how big that threat really was. Maybe we were wrong about a lot of things." She opened her other eye and looked directly at Threll. "But I don't think we were wrong to be afraid of them. I think, if anything, we should have been more afraid." Threll didn't respond. He simply nodded, turning back to the window, watching the stars blur past in streaks of white and blue. 10 hours later, the Windrunner dropped out of its final jump, arriving at the edge of the old human solar system. Earth floated ahead of them in the darkness, a small blue and gray sphere, quiet and still. From this distance it looked exactly like it had for the past 50 years, a dead world, empty, lifeless, nothing but the ghost of what used to be humanity's home. "Beginning approach scan," the pilot said, guiding the ship closer. Threll stared out the window at the planet growing larger ahead of them. He remembered seeing it like this once before, 50 years ago, right before the final battle began. Back then, Earth had been surrounded by burning ships and flashing weapons fire. Now it was silent. Peaceful, almost. Too peaceful. "Sensors are picking up something odd," the pilot said, frowning at his console. "There's a lot of interference near the northern hemisphere. Some kind of energy field, but it's faint. Almost like it's trying to hide itself." "Can you get a visual?" Yasa asked, leaning forward. "Working on it, Commander." The main screen flickered, slowly rendering an image of Earth's surface as the ship's cameras zoomed in. At first, everything looked normal. Gray ruins, cracked cities, empty streets covered in 50 years of dust, exactly as the old reports described. Then the pilot adjusted the scan, switching to a deeper thermal imaging mode. Everyone in the cabin froze. Beneath the surface of Earth's largest ruined city, deep underground, a massive heat signature glowed on the screen. A huge, sprawling network of tunnels and chambers, stretching for what looked like hundreds of miles in every direction. It was warm. It was active. It was very, very alive. "That's not possible," the pilot whispered. Threll felt his blood turn to ice. "Get us closer," he said. "We need a better look." "Sir, if there's something down there, getting closer could—" "Do it," Yasa ordered, her voice hard and steady despite the tension in the room. "We need proof, not guesses." The pilot nodded nervously and adjusted the ship's course, bringing them into a lower orbit above the ruined city. As they descended, more details began to appear on the scan. Ventilation systems, power lines, structural supports, all buried deep beneath the surface, all completely invisible from space unless you knew exactly where to look and how to look for it. "This has been here the whole time," Threll said quietly, almost in disbelief. 50 years, and nobody ever saw this." "Because nobody ever looked hard enough," Yasa said. "We saw ruins on the surface and assumed that was the whole story. Suddenly, the ship's console let out a sharp, beeping alarm. "We've got movement," the pilot said, his voice rising with alarm. "Something's coming up from underground, multiple somethings, I'm reading dozens of contacts moving fast, heading straight toward our position." Threll's heart pounded as he leaned forward, staring at the screen. Small dots were emerging from the surface near the ruined city, rising up out of hidden hangars disguised as piles of rubble, moving in tight, disciplined formation. Ships. Human ships, built with technology that looked both familiar and terrifyingly advanced, rising out of the ruins of Earth like ghosts returning from the grave. "They knew we were coming," Yasa breathed. "They were waiting for us." "New contact detected," the pilot said, his voice shaking now. "Direct transmission. Incoming. Audio only." The cabin went dead silent as the pilot opened the channel. For a moment, there was only static. Then a voice spoke. Calm, clear, and unmistakably human. A sound the galaxy hadn't heard in 50 years. "Hello, old friends," the voice said, almost gently, almost sadly. "You're a little early, but that's all right. We've been waiting a long time to say this properly." A pause. The static crackled softly in the silence. "Welcome back to Earth," the voice continued. "We never actually left." The transmission cut off. On the screen, dozens of human ships continued rising from the ruins below, forming a slow, silent wall between the Windrunner and the planet's surface. Not attacking. Not yet. Just watching. Just waiting. Threll stared at the screen, his hands trembling slightly, his mind struggling to accept what he was seeing. 50 years of celebration. 50 years of parties and victory songs and statues of crushed human ships. All of it built on a lie. Humanity had never died. They had simply been waiting underground this entire time, rebuilding, preparing, growing stronger in the dark while the rest of the galaxy forgot them completely. And now, they were finally ready to come back out into the light. "Get us out of here," Yasa said quietly, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. "Now. We need to warn Command immediately." The pilot didn't need to be told twice. The Windrunner spun around sharply, engines roaring as it turned away from Earth and the silent wall of human ships watching from below. As they jumped back into deep space, Threll took one last look at the small blue planet shrinking behind them, glowing faintly now with lights that hadn't been seen in 50 years. He thought about the human commander's final words again, the ones that had haunted him for so long. "This is not the end. This is only the part where you stop watching." He finally understood what those words truly meant. The Grand Concord had stopped watching a long time ago, and now, the watching was over. The Windrunner shot through space at full speed, jumping from system to system as fast as its engines could handle. Nobody in the cabin spoke for a long time. The image of those human ships rising from the ruins of Earth was burned into everyone's mind, along with that calm, chilling voice. "Welcome back to Earth. We never actually left." Threll stared out the window, his hands still slightly shaking. Yasa sat across from him, her jaw tight, already composing the report she would have to give to General Draxus. The pilot kept glancing nervously at his sensors, as if expecting human ships to appear behind them at any moment. They didn't. Whatever humanity was doing, it seemed they weren't ready to chase. Not yet. "They let us go," Threll said quietly, breaking the silence. "They could have attacked us back there, destroyed us easily, but they just let us leave. That's what worries me most," Yasa said. "An enemy that has the advantage and chooses not to use it isn't being kind. They're sending a message. They want us to go back and tell everyone what we saw." Threll thought about that. "So they want the Concord to know they're back." "They want the Concord to be afraid," Yasa corrected. "There's a difference. Fear makes people make mistakes." Back on Velcorin, the command center was in chaos by the time the Windrunner landed. General Draxus had already received a short emergency transmission from the scout ship during the return trip, just enough to confirm that Earth was not dead and that human forces had been detected. Now, as Threll and Yasa walked into the command room exhausted and shaken, every officer in the building turned to look at them. "Report," Draxus said immediately, his scarred face tense. Threll stepped forward, his voice steady despite everything. "Sir, Earth is not a dead world. There is a massive underground network beneath the surface, larger than anything we imagined. We detected dozens of human warships, all fully operational, rising from hidden hangars. We also received a direct transmission from a human representative." "What did they say?" Draxus asked. Yasa answered this time. "That they never left. That we were watching the wrong thing for 50 years. The room went completely silent. Even the constant hum of machines and screens seemed to fade into the background as the weight of those words settled over everyone present. Draxus closed his eyes for a moment, his hands gripping the edge of the command table. When he opened them again, his expression was grim, but calm. The look of a soldier who had faced impossible odds before and refused to panic. "Pull every file we have on the final years of the war," he ordered. "Every record, every report, every piece of intelligence, no matter how small. I want to know exactly how this happened. I want to know what we missed." While command scrambled to review old records, Threll found himself unable to rest. He sat alone in a small briefing room, surrounded by old files pulled from deep storage. Some of them so old, the digital records had barely survived being converted from ancient formats. He began piecing together a story that nobody in the Grand Concord had ever fully understood. 53 years ago, when the war between humanity and the Grand Concord first began, humans had been hopelessly outnumbered. The Concord controlled hundreds of worlds and thousands of ships. Humanity controlled one solar system and a handful of small colonies nearby. On paper, the war should have ended in months. It didn't. It lasted 3 brutal years, and it nearly bankrupted the Concord in resources and lives. Humanity fought with a creativity and stubbornness that shocked every alien commander who faced them. They built weapons out of scrap. They turned defeats into traps. They never seemed to run out of new tricks right up until the final battle. But here was the part that had never made sense to Threll, the part that had been bothering him since the party on Velcorin. Humanity's technology had improved dramatically in the final 6 months of the war, far faster than should have been possible for a species already losing badly. New ship designs, new weapons, new defensive systems that Concord scanners had never seen before. At the time, Concord analysts had assumed this was simply humanity throwing everything they had left into one last desperate push before the end. Now, sitting alone with 50 years of hindsight, Threll saw it differently. They weren't fighting harder because they were losing. They were fighting harder because they were buying time. Time for something else. Time to build something in secret, while the Concord's attention stayed locked on the battles happening in plain sight. Threll found an old interview buried deep in the archive, recorded by a Concord intelligence officer just weeks before the final battle. It was a conversation with a captured human engineer, one of the very few prisoners the Concord had managed to take during the war. The recording was old and grainy, but the words were clear enough. "You think this is the whole war," the human engineer had said, his voice tired but strangely calm for someone facing interrogation. "You think if you win this battle, it's over. But you're not fighting a species that gives up because we're losing. We've been losing this fight since the day it started. We knew that from the beginning." "Then why fight at all?" the Concord officer had asked. The human had smiled, an unsettling, knowing smile that the old camera had captured perfectly. "Because losing slowly gives us time to build something you'll never see coming." The recording ended there. According to the file notes, the prisoner had died of unknown causes 3 days later, before any follow-up questions could be asked. Threll sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. 50 years ago, this man had practically told the Concord exactly what was happening, and nobody had listened. Nobody had taken it seriously. It had been filed away as the meaningless words of an angry, defeated prisoner. It hadn't been meaningless at all. It had been a warning. Yasa entered the briefing room a few hours later, carrying a tablet full of her own research. She looked as tired as Threll felt, but there was a sharp focus in her eyes that hadn't been there since the celebration 2 nights ago. "I think I found how they did it," she said, sitting down across from him. Threll looked up. "Tell me." During the final year of the war, humanity evacuated far more colonists than we ever accounted for, Yasa explained, pulling up old population records on her tablet. Our reports said most human colonies were destroyed or captured. But the population numbers never fully added up. Millions of humans were listed as unaccounted for, rather than confirmed dead. Because they weren't dead, Threll said slowly. They were hidden. Exactly. I think during the final year of the war, while the Concord was focused on destroying human fleets and capturing colonies, humanity was secretly evacuating millions of civilians to hidden locations. Underground bunkers, deep space stations disguised as wreckage, places built specifically to be overlooked. And they built all of this while still fighting a losing war on the surface, Threll said, shaking his head in disbelief. That's not just clever. That's insane. That takes an entire species working together in perfect secrecy for years. Humans have always been good at secrets, Yasa said quietly. Better than we ever gave them credit for. As the two of them continued piecing together the truth, General Draxus called an emergency meeting with every senior officer in the conquered military stationed on Velcorin. The mood in the room was heavy, tense, filled with the kind of fear that came from realizing a great and terrible mistake had been made. 50 years ago, we believed we won a war, Draxus said, standing at the head of the table, his voice carrying easily through the silent room. We were wrong. We didn't win a war. We won a battle, and the enemy allowed us to believe it was the whole war. Murmurs spread through the room. Some officers looked afraid. Others looked angry, refusing to accept what they were hearing. That's impossible, one officer said sharply. We destroyed their fleets. We took their worlds. There's no way a defeated species could rebuild an entire military in secret without us noticing anything. And yet, that is exactly what happened, Draxus said firmly. We have confirmed footage of active human warships. We have a direct transmission from a human representative. And we have 50 years of ignored warning signs that we chose not to investigate, because it was easier to believe we had won completely. The room fell silent again. So what do we do now? Yasa asked from her seat. Draxus was quiet for a long moment before answering. We prepare. We gather every piece of intelligence we can. And we try to understand exactly what humanity has built during these 50 years, before they decide to show us themselves. Deep beneath the ruins of Earth, in the vast underground city hidden from the galaxy for half a century, humanity was doing exactly what General Draxus feared. They were preparing. In a massive control room built into solid rock, dozens of screens displayed information gathered from hidden listening posts scattered across 100 different star systems. Posts that had been secretly recording conquered activity for decades, learning their patterns, their weaknesses, their fleet movements, their politics. At the center of the room stood a woman named Elena Voss, the leader of what remained of humanity's government, now simply called the Council. She was in her 60s, her hair completely gray, her face lined with the weight of decades spent underground, planning, waiting, preparing for this exact moment. Beside her stood a younger man, Captain Marcus Reyes, the commander of Earth's rebuilt fleet, a man who had been born after the war ended, who had never known life on the surface, who had grown up entirely underground being trained for a single purpose. This day, the scout ship has reported back to their command, Marcus said, watching the data feeds, just as we expected. Good, Elena said calmly. Let them be afraid. Fear will make them careless. It will make them argue with each other instead of preparing properly. And if they decide to strike first before we're fully ready? Elena turned to face him, her expression steady and confident. We've had 50 years to prepare for exactly that possibility, Marcus. We are as ready as we will ever be, more ready, in fact, than the conquered could possibly imagine. Marcus nodded, though a flicker of doubt crossed his face. Some of the younger officers are asking questions about revenge, about making them pay for what they did to us. Elena's expression hardened slightly. This was never about revenge, Marcus. Revenge is what weak people reach for when they have nothing else to offer. What we are doing is about balance, about making sure no species, ours or theirs, ever again believes they can simply erase another people from existence without consequence. She turned back to the massive screen showing a live map of the galaxy, dotted with hundreds of quietly blinking lights. Human outposts, hidden fleets, secret bases, all waking up together after 50 long years of patient silence. "Begin the final preparations," Elena said. It's time the galaxy remembered exactly who they were celebrating the death of. Back on Velcorin, night had fallen again over the city. The statue of the crushed human ship still stood in the main square, though nobody was celebrating around it anymore. The streets, so full of music and laughter just 2 nights before, were now quiet, filled instead with worried whispers and fearful glances toward the night sky. Threll stood on a balcony overlooking the city, staring up at the stars, wondering how many of those distant points of light hid old human bases, old human ships, old human secrets that had been waiting patiently in the dark for exactly this moment. Yasa joined him quietly, standing beside him without speaking for a while. "Do you think we can survive this?" Threll finally asked. "If it comes to another war?" Yasa considered the question carefully before answering. "I don't know," she admitted. "Last time we won because we had numbers and they had determination. Now it sounds like they might have both." Threll nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the stars. "There's something else that's been bothering me," he said. "That human commander's message. Welcome back to Earth. We never actually left. It wasn't angry. It wasn't threatening. It was almost polite." "You think they don't want war?" Yasa asked. "I think," Threll said slowly, "that they want us to understand something first. That whatever happens next, they want it to be clear that this isn't senseless revenge. They want the galaxy to know exactly what we did and exactly why they're back. Far above them, unseen in the vast darkness of space, hundreds of human ships were finally beginning to move. Not toward Velcorin. Not yet. They were moving toward the stars, spreading out across old trade routes and forgotten systems, gathering allies among other species who had also suffered under the Grand Concord's rule over the decades, quietly building not just an army, but a message. Humanity had spent 50 years alone in the dark, preparing. Now, it was finally time for the rest of the galaxy to see exactly what they had built. 7 days passed after the Windrunner returned from Earth, and those 7 days were the most tense the Grand Concord had experienced in 50 years. Every hour brought a new report. A hidden human outpost discovered near the mining colonies of Kessa. A fleet of unknown ships spotted passing quietly through conquered trade routes, never attacking, never even slowing down, just moving with quiet purpose toward some unknown destination. Old alliances, species who had been forced to bow to conquered rule decades ago, suddenly growing bolder, sending strange new messages, asking questions the conquered didn't have good answers for. Humanity wasn't hiding anymore, but they weren't attacking either. They were simply showing themselves, slowly, deliberately, letting the fear spread on its own. On the 8th day, everything changed.
General Draxus stood in the command center on Velcorin, staring at a massive tactical map that had grown more crowded with red warning markers every single day. His face, already scarred from old wars, now carried new lines of exhaustion and worry. "Report," he said, his voice tight. A technician rushed forward, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled up new data. "Sir, we're detecting a massive fleet movement. Hundreds of ships jumping simultaneously from multiple locations across the galaxy. Origin points include Earth, the Kessa system, and at least 12 other locations we previously marked as abandoned." "Destination?" Draxus asked. The technician hesitated. "All indicators point to here, sir." Velcorin. The room went utterly silent. Threll, standing near the back of the command center with Yasa beside him, felt his stomach drop. This was it. After 50 years of false peace, after a lie the entire galaxy had built its comfort upon, humanity was finally coming home to collect what they believed they were owed. "How long until they arrive?" Draxus asked. 6 hours, sir? Maybe less." Draxus closed his eyes briefly, and for just a moment, Threll saw something rare cross the old general's face. Not fear exactly, but the heavy weight of responsibility for millions of lives now hanging in the balance. Sound the planetary alarm, Draxus ordered. Recall every ship in the sector. Prepare full defensive positions. He paused, then added quietly, almost to himself, and pray we haven't made the same mistake twice. 6 hours felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Across Valkyrin, the peaceful streets that had recently hosted fireworks and celebration now filled with fear. Citizens rushed toward shelters. Military ships raced to defensive positions above the planet, forming tight defensive lines in the dark of space. Every available soldier, every available weapon, was prepared and ready. Threll stood on the bridge of a mid-sized Concord warship called the Ashwind, assigned there by Draxus himself, due to his first-hand knowledge of human tactics from the original war. Yasa stood beside him, now given emergency command of the vessel due to her combat experience. Sensors are picking up the jump signatures now, the ship's navigator called out. They're here. Space in front of the Concord defensive line rippled and tore open as ship after ship emerged from hyperspace, appearing in perfect formation. Calm and controlled. Nothing like the desperate, scattered fleet the Concord remembered from 50 years ago. Threll's breath caught in his throat as he watched the numbers climb on the tactical display. 50 ships. 100. 100. The human fleet kept arriving, sleek and powerful, technology clearly decades ahead of what the Concord remembered fighting against. But strangely, they didn't move to attack. They simply stopped, forming a massive wall of ships facing the Concord defensive line. Engines glowing softly in the darkness, weapons visible but not firing, waiting. They're not attacking, Yasa said, confusion clear in her voice. They're not here to attack, Threll realized slowly, at least not yet. A single transmission request appeared on the Ashwind's console, addressed not to the ship, but to General Draxus directly, broadcast openly across every Concord channel so the entire fleet could hear it. Draxus accepted the transmission from Valkyrin's command center. His voice was patched through to every ship in the defensive line. "This is General Draxus of the Grand Concord Fleet," he said, his voice steady despite the tension. "You are trespassing in Concord territory. State your intentions." There was a brief pause. Then a new voice answered, calm and clear, a voice that Threll immediately recognized as belonging to the same person who had spoken to them above Earth. It was Alina Voss. "General Draxus," she said, her tone almost gentle, carrying none of the anger anyone had expected. 50 years ago, your people celebrated the death of mine. You built statues of our broken ships. You taught your children that we were a threat too dangerous to be allowed to exist. And you were wrong. Her voice grew slightly firmer, though still controlled. "We are not here today for revenge, General. If we wanted revenge, believe me, this conversation would already be over. We are here because it's time the galaxy learned the truth. Humanity did not die. We simply waited. And now, we're asking for something very simple. Acknowledgement. Accountability." Draxus was quiet for a long moment before responding, and if the Concord refuses to acknowledge these demands, then you'll discover exactly how patient a species can become after 50 years spent preparing in the dark, Lena said, her voice hardening slightly. "But I don't think that's a road either of us truly wants to walk, General. Too many people have already died because of decisions made in fear and pride. I'd rather this be the moment where that finally changes." Inside the command center on Velcorin, chaos erupted as officials argued over what to do. Some demanded immediate attack, insisting the growing human fleet was too dangerous to allow so close to the Concord capital. Others urged caution, terrified of what full-scale war against a fully prepared humanity might actually look like. Draxus stood at the center of the argument, his mind racing, weighing 50 years of pride against the lives of everyone on the planet below. It was Threll's voice, transmitted from the Ashwind, that finally cut through the noise. "General, permission to speak?" Draxus, surprised by the interruption, allowed it. "Go ahead, Lieutenant." "Sir, I was there 50 years ago. I've spent the last week studying everything we have on what really happened during that war." Threll took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "We didn't defeat humanity because we were stronger. We defeated them because we caught them before they were ready. Today, they came here with hundreds of ships and didn't fire a single shot. If they wanted this to be a massacre, sir, it already would be. Silence stretched across the channel. They're not here for war, Threll continued. They're here because they want to be seen, heard, after 50 years of silence. Maybe that's all they really want right now. Draxus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the tactical display where hundreds of human ships continued to hold their position, weapons ready but not firing, patient and controlled. Finally, he made his decision. Hold all weapons, Draxus ordered across every channel. Nobody fires unless fired upon first. That is a direct order. Hours passed in tense negotiation, first through careful, cautious transmissions, and eventually through a face-to-face meeting arranged in neutral space between the two fleets. A small shuttle carried General Draxus, accompanied by Threll and Yasa, toward a human vessel waiting quietly at the meeting point. As the shuttle docked and the doors opened, Threll found himself standing face to face, for the first time in 50 years, with actual living humans. Alina Voss stood at the front of a small, welcoming party, her gray hair pulled back neatly, her expression calm but firm. Beside her stood Captain Marcus Reyes, younger, more guarded, his eyes carefully studying every Concord officer who stepped aboard. General Draxus, Alina said, extending a hand in an old human gesture of greeting. Thank you for coming. Draxus hesitated only a moment before accepting the gesture, shaking her hand carefully. Ms. Voss, I admit I did not expect this meeting to happen under these circumstances. Neither did we, 50 years ago, Alina replied, a small, tired smile crossing her face. Life has a way of surprising all of us. They moved to a private meeting room aboard the human vessel, where the real conversation began. Alina explained everything, how humanity had spent the final years of the war secretly evacuating civilians, hiding technology, preparing for a future they knew might take decades to arrive. Children who grew up training for a war they never personally started, but had inherited nonetheless. We didn't come here today for war, Alina said firmly, looking directly at Draxus. We came here because pretending we don't exist isn't sustainable, not for us, and honestly, not for you either. The galaxy needs to know the truth about what happened 50 years ago. Not to punish anyone alive today for the mistakes of the past, but so it never happens again, to us, or to anyone else. Draxus listened carefully, his expression unreadable for a long time. Finally, he spoke. What is it you actually want, Ms. Voss? Alina exchanged a brief glance with Marcus before answering. Recognition, she said simply. A place in the galaxy that isn't hidden underground or erased from history. Full transparency about what really happened 50 years ago. To promise, backed by real consequences. That no species will ever again try to quietly erase another from existence simply because they're afraid of what that species might become. The room fell silent as everyone considered the weight of her words. The negotiations that followed lasted for days, filled with disagreements, tension, and moments where war seemed dangerously close once again. But slowly, carefully, a new understanding began to form between the Grand Concord and the humanity that refused to stay dead. Threll found himself playing an unexpected role throughout the process, often serving as a bridge between the two sides. Someone who understood both the fear that had driven the Concord's original actions and the quiet determination that had allowed humanity to survive against impossible odds. During one of the final negotiation sessions, Threll found himself standing beside Captain Marcus Reyes on the observation deck of the human ship, both men staring silently out at the stars. Can I ask you something? Threll said eventually. Marcus glanced at him, his expression cautious but not hostile. Go ahead, you were born after the war ended, right? Grew up entirely underground, training for a fight you never personally chose? Marcus nodded slowly. That's right. Do you resent it? Threll asked. Growing up like that, knowing your whole life was built around preparing for this exact moment. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering the question honestly. Sometimes, he admitted, there were nights I wondered what life could have been like if none of this ever happened, if I could have just grown up normally, without the weight of an entire species' survival resting on my shoulders. He paused, looking out at the stars. But then I remember why we had to do it. Not for revenge, not for hatred. Just so we'd have the chance to exist at all. That's worth something, I think. It's maybe worth everything. Threll nodded slowly, understanding perhaps for the first time the true cost of what humanity had endured, hidden away in the dark for 50 long years. For what it's worth, Threll said quietly, I'm sorry. For what we did. For what my people believed about yours. Marcus studied him carefully before responding. Sorry's a good start, Lieutenant, but it's what happens next that will really matter. Eventually, an agreement was reached. Humanity would be formally recognized by the Grand Concord as an independent species with full rights and protections. No longer hidden, no longer hunted, no longer forced to live in secret beneath the ruins of their homeworld. The full truth about the war would be released publicly across every Concord world, replacing 50 years of celebrated lies with an uncomfortable but necessary history lesson. Statues celebrating humanity's defeat would be removed. School lessons would be rewritten. An entire galaxy would slowly have to relearn what actually happened 50 years ago, and reconsider what they truly believed about strength, fear, and the dangerous mistake of underestimating those you've wronged. It wasn't a perfect peace. Old wounds don't heal overnight, and many across the galaxy, both human and Concord alike, remained deeply distrustful of the other side. But it was a beginning, a real one, built on truth instead of comfortable lies. Weeks later, Threll stood once again in the main square of Velcorin, though the scene looked very different from the celebration he had witnessed just over a month earlier. The statue of the crushed human ship was gone now, removed as part of the new agreement. In its place stood a simple memorial, honoring all those lost during the original war, human and Concord alike. A quiet reminder that victory built on another's suffering was never something worth celebrating in the first place. Yasa joined him, standing quietly beside the new memorial. Strange, isn't it? She said. A month ago, this square was full of fireworks and cheering, celebrating something that never actually happened. Yeah, Threll agreed softly. The galaxy celebrated an extinction that was never real. It took Earth's signal to finally wake everyone up, including us. Yasa nodded slowly, her eyes distant as she thought about everything that had changed in such a short time. Do you think it's really over? She asked. The fear, the mistrust, all of it? Threll considered the question carefully before answering. I don't think fear disappears that easily, he said finally. Not after 50 years. But maybe it doesn't have to disappear completely. Maybe it just has to become something we handle honestly, instead of hiding behind comfortable lies and quiet celebrations. Above them, the night sky stretched out, filled with countless stars, each one hiding secrets. The galaxy was only now beginning to properly understand. Somewhere among those stars, humanity was finally stepping back into the light after 50 long years hidden in darkness. No longer a ghost the galaxy could safely forget, but a living, breathing reminder of a simple truth every species would now have to remember. Silence was never surrender. Sometimes, silence was simply humanity's way of reloading.